Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now, this part of the garden, the cottage garden, is beginning to billow and flop and fall all over the place, which is lovely, because it adds to the looseness, but it does need a little bit of propping up. These Campanulas, for example, this is Pritchard's variety, will stay tall and fine if I just prop them gently underneath. Now, the idea, of course, is when you're propping a plant, you don't want to just put it into a straitjacket and corset it. You just want to stop it falling, so it looks natural, but not too loose. This week, I returned to a garden in Cambridge that was tantalisingly out of reach for me as a student. What I hadn't realised when I used to peek through the gates was the extent of this border. And we visit a gardener who's overcome many challenges to create her own private sanctuary.
I think you have to be a good tangential thinker. You know, if you can't do things the obvious way, what other ways might work?
Now, the cottage garden is good and established now, but today I'm going to be starting to plant the scented garden on the mound, and I'm also going to have a roundup of all my summer veg. Come on. This is the mound. The idea is to make it a scented garden. And what I want to do is plant a hedge of lavender. Now, the problem with lavender is always the same. It's drainage, and that's what I'm going to give it. Now, having dug a trench along here, I'm going to put some hardcore in the bottom. Now, hardcore is rubble, and it may seem that a delicate plant would never cope with this kind of substratum to it, but it's ideal because it will ensure that the water doesn't sit at the bottom of the trench. Right. The next step is to shovel soil on top of it. So we've got a basic planting trench there, backfilled, but that's not enough. I want even more drainage. This is horticultural grit. It's fine if you've got sandy soil or chalky, then obviously you don't need it. But if you've got heavy clay soil like I have, grit is a really good investment. Lightly work it in. I'm going to put a little bit more soil on that because the effect I want to do is to plant it on a ridge. I want to plant it above the surrounding soil level. If you can't dig trenches and you don't have enough drainage material, you can make a ridge and plant the lavender on it, and that will work pretty well. I've spaced them about 1 foot to 18 inches apart, which is right for a hedge. This is lavender angustifolia twickle purple. There are lots and lots of different varieties of angustifolia, which is the English lavender. And I've chosen this one, partly for its colour, and also because it's a very robust, strong-growing lavender. Now, the actual process of planting it is dead easy. Scrape a hole and plant it so it's not submerged, just deep enough so that the grit comes up round it. Now, already that's looking good, I think. And then when it's formed a hedge, this whole area will be just opulent with the fragrance of the lavender.
The summer wind came blowing in from across the sea and lingered there, so warm and fair, to walk with me.
It's really important that we use all the different senses to maximise our enjoyment of the garden. And we deny ourselves if we don't do that and work on it. But For some people, that's not possible. For various reasons, they may not have or may have lost use of senses. And Elizabeth Standen in Bristol is one of those people. But that has not stopped her gardening.
Oh, I love my garden. The garden sold me the house. I walked round the house twice and then up the garden twice and more or less made up my mind. I come out of the back door and opposite I've got the ferns. I really like the ferns. They're very kind of tactile, very strokeable. Yeah. I'm going to put the brakes on and look at the Alstroemeria. They're very nice, actually. They've got, when the flowers are out, they're kind of bell-shaped. They're very, very pretty. And it flowers for months on end. This one, it's a scrambling geranium. Really nice plant. As you can see, I'm physically disabled. I've got a curved spine. I've got limited walking with secondary arthritis. I'm totally blind. And I'm actually quite severely hearing impaired. Solutions that other disabled gardeners have found don't help me, like most visually impaired gardeners garden on their knees so that they can feel what they're doing. Where did I put the trowel? Oh, yeah, here it is. I can't reach up and I can't reach down, so basically I need these beds to be up at my level. It's small, but you can see the different cloves on it. I think you have to be a good tangential thinker. You know, if you can't do things the obvious way, what other ways might work? The weed, as far as I'm concerned, is a plant where I don't want it. What I'm doing at the moment is looking at the dead bits that have got no leaves on and are brittle, so if you bend them, they just snap. No, that one's still alive because it's got spring in it. Won't snap easily. So, if I was giving a disabled gardener one piece of advice, especially visually impaired gardener, is to know your garden inside out, to be able to walk around it happily and safely, but also to keep things in their place. Here you see I've got tools hanging on the inside of the shed door. You can just get at them so easily. So I'm going up to the greenhouse now. And we'll be passing, we're passing the sweet corn here on the left. I suppose I was genetically programmed to be a gardener. Both my parents were. Dad grew the roses and the veg and Mum grew the rest of the flowers. And they were very proud of their garden. I tie up my tomatoes. I use a reef knot rather than a granny knot because they're easier to undo if you have to. That's nicely tied up now. You know by texture usually whether fruit or veggies are ready. I mean, tomatoes, you should be able to squish them a little bit, but not too much. You don't want them squishy because they've gone over them, but you don't want them hard either. Sometimes I just taste things. I love the smell of tomato leaves. They remind me of my dad. Yeah. The flowers are nice, but they're a bonus, if you like. It's growing things to eat that I'm really into. Wow, that's a long one. I might leave it to get a bit fatter, I think. Cucumber leaves are smooth on one side and slightly rough on the other side. Another advantage of them is that they get thinner as they need watering. In fact, I think this could do with a bit of watering. Oh, there's more coming than I thought. There's lots of little ones coming. I'll come back later and give them a lot more water, but I thought I'd give them a helping hand now. You know, people often ask me which is my favourite part of the garden, and that's difficult because I love it all. But if I really had to be pushed, I think it's the fruit cage. It's been a really good crop of blackcurrants this year. I like eating them raw. I like blackcurrant jam as well. My mum used to make it. Nothing like homemade jam. I'm rattling them and then I pull them off. You can feel them, look. You can see them waving, I can feel them. I love my garden and I like my privacy. It's my space and people can't get in unless I want them here. There's nothing quite like growing things that you eat yourself and knowing you've done it. Yeah, I love my garden.
I do think that's a really good point that Elizabeth makes. It's so important to have somewhere private in your garden. When the time comes, I will sit here and really enjoy these lavender. And by the way, I have watered them in thoroughly. Just because they like good drainage doesn't mean that they don't need a good soak when you plant them. And then, if it's very dry, watering once a week or so will help. Now, a job that you can do between now and September is to take lavender cuttings. You want to look for growth that isn't carrying a flower bud. Now, there isn't any suitable material on these plants because they're full of flower, but I've got a couple here that are good. I'm going to need my glasses to show it. We've got one here, and you can see these flower heads are not suitable, and any with a bud on like that is not suitable. But if you look, a growth there on the edge, I could take a good cutting from this. We will cut back each cutting about 4 to 6 inches long. That's a goodie. I'm going to pop that in a bag too. And by putting it in a bag, you're slowing down the evaporation rate. Let's go to the potting shed. Go nice. I've got some cuttings that I took in May. These are rosemary cuttings, and you can see they're growing. They've rooted. I'll leave them in this pot for another month or two, and then I'll pot them on, and they'll be ready to go out next summer, and they should look like this. These were cuttings taken last September from rosemary, and it's starting to make a little woody shrub. And in fact, lavender, French lavender, Lavender stoicus, a year old, a little plant, it's even got a flower. So it's really easy to make plants from free, and not just any old plants, but plants that you love. I'm actually going to take some cuttings using sharp sand rather than any special cutting mixture. And it can work just as well. If you buy a bag of Builder's sharp sand, and you can get it from any hardware store of any kind, and you just don't mix it with any compost at all, the cutting will strike perfectly well. And sharp sand is gritty, so you get good drainage. So we just put some in a pot like that, and it's slightly damp, which is also good. These cuttings are semi-ripe, which means they are taken from this year's growth that has had a chance to slightly mature. And whatever you do, the first thing to do is take most of the foliage off, because it's losing moisture through the foliage. And this is where a sharp knife comes into play. And I will pop that in, and I'm going to do it quickly into the corners. Pop that in. There we go. Now you can see that this is starting to wilt already, so we need to quickly get it into a protected area. I'm going to pop these in the greenhouse, but anywhere that is warm, sheltered, and light, but not in bright sunlight. If you've got a windowsill that's south-facing, that can be too warm and they'll dry out. A north-facing or an east-facing one tends to be better. And keep them moist but not wet. A mist sprayer is a really good thing for cuttings. Just mist them 2 or 3 times a day. And I'd be very surprised if these hadn't started to root within about 10 days' time. Now, I've gardened since I was a small boy. But when I was a student at Cambridge, there weren't many opportunities for actually gardening, but I was surrounded by lots of gardens attached to each college, fellows' gardens. But there was one in particular whose gates were always firmly closed. Well, I have been back to have a look for the first time. When I was an undergraduate here 40 years ago, I kept a dog. And I used to get up very early in the morning and take her for a walk. And one of my favourite routes was via here, across Clare College Bridge, this beautiful bridge. And tantalisingly, on the other side of the river was this garden. And I longed to go in and have a look around, but I couldn't because I was just an undergraduate and you could only get in if you were a fellow or if a fellow took you in. And that seemed to be impossible. So I would look, be fascinated, and have to walk on by.
Entry to the garden is still mainly restricted to a privileged few, but today I've been given special access to a garden I've always been curious to see.
Certain things are incredibly vivid. It's as though it was yesterday. But then certain things are sort of curiously different. For example, that beech tree, which obviously was there 40 years ago, but I realised was a lot smaller. It's grown a great deal in 40 years, as well it might. And I'm certain that there were no bananas planted, and it didn't feel quite so exotic. I remember there was very much an impression of a country garden, a garden that you might find attached to a beautiful house.
The garden extends to 2 acres. It's surrounded on 3 sides by water. And inside, there is a huge lawn, flanked by enormous borders.
What I hadn't realised when I used to peek through the gates was the extent of this border flanking the lawn. And it's just packed with colour. And that colour, unusually, is coming almost entirely from herbaceous perennials. And big colour, too, colour leaping at you. This is just colour that will appear from the ground, from nowhere, every spring. And it goes on and on. You get to the corner and think that's a lot, and there's as much again.
Steve Elstrup is the head gardener and has the difficult task of keeping the garden contemporary whilst respecting the traditions of the college.
I remember peering through the gates here 40 years ago and thinking it's a beautiful garden, but sort of not able to get in. But I do notice things have changed. I mean, certainly these bananas were not here.
No, they wouldn't
40 years
no.
ago. And I'm intrigued to see that there are areas of long grass.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
I don't think those would have been around 40
No, they
years
wouldn't.
ago.
This lawn would have been very short, right up to the shrubbery there.
Yeah.
We've just allowed that. It's not a huge width, but anybody can do it. Just a little bit of unkemptness at the side. And we're trying to end up with a meadowy area that's good for habitat, good for the life cycles, just to benefit a few insects.
What's the garden used for mainly?
In the summertime, it is used for a lot of functions. Fellows will use it quite privately, just to come in here by themselves or with a small group. Students, undergraduates are in studying, hopefully. Oh, and don't forget the May Ball.
Right, so the May
have to
Ball
put
is
a-
held here, is it?
It is, yeah, it is, yeah. And we're only 3 or 4 weeks over having got rid of the Dodgem cars,
Really?
etc., etc.
You're expected to host that and return the garden to immaculate order.
Within less than a week for graduation, so then we have the mums and dads, obviously, and it really needs to look good for that day.
So no pressure.
No pressure.
This area was just a meadow when in 1947 Professor Neville Wilmer, a college fellow and a keen gardener, was given free rein to redesign the garden as you see it today. This area was developed so that the dean could walk whilst composing his Sunday sermons. He also designed this enormous double herbaceous border with just blue and yellow flowers. Wilmer was studying how the eyes perceive colour under different light levels, the theory being that blue appears more intense in lower light, and yellow appears brighter at midday. The garden also features a sunken area created to satisfy a deliciously quirky request.
Apparently, one of the fellows wanted somewhere where he could go and sleep under the stars. Now, isn't that wonderful? That there could be room for that kind of eccentricity and quirkiness. And that's one of the things I love about Cambridge. And long may gardens be made for people to sleep under the stars. Although Clare College Fellows Garden is by and large closed to the public, it will be open for one afternoon on August the 9th to raise money for the Red Cross. And if you go to our website, you can get all the details. And if you are near Cambridge, I do advise you to go along. It's a lovely place. Now, the vegetable garden here at Longmeadow is coming along fine, but there's one particular experiment I've been trying with melons. I thought I'd try and grow some outside, grow some in a hotbed, and also grow some under cover, and just see what the difference was. Well, my melons grown outside are so far, quite frankly, pathetic. It's the heat that the melons are lacking. These are the hotbeds. They're cold frames, and I packed them full of fresh horse manure, trampled it down, wet them, put a layer of soil on top and planted 2 melons to each cold frame. And you can see there are good fruit setting and forming. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in there. The key thing is not to try and grow too many. There are flowers down here, all of which potentially could produce a fruit, but they won't have time to ripen. They will take a lot of energy from the plant. Far better to limit it to 4 fruit per plant and let those 4 be really good. So what I'll do is simply cut back the overhang. So if I just take that and cut it there, cut that back. What this also means that if for some reason we do get a freak cold night, I can close the lid up and keep the warmth in. And that is really important with melons. They like warmth. Now, talking of heat for melons, I've got a third lot of melons growing, which are kept as hot as I possibly can. In here, pop those down for a moment, I've got some melons growing not just in the greenhouse, but in the hot bit of the greenhouse. And look, here is a melon climbing up, really luxuriant. It actually hasn't got any more fruit than the ones growing in the hotbeds, but they love it in here. So hopefully, somewhere between here and the hotbeds, we should get some decent melons. Now, those can go on there. This, by the way, is a holding bay. And once a week, all this gets chopped or shredded and goes on to this, which is the current heap. Pretty full now, almost ready to be turned, but it can't be turned until this one has finished being turned. And this has just stopped for a moment because I wanted to show you something. Have a look. These are grass snake eggs. Now, every year we find grass snake eggs in our compost heaps. It can be up to 5, 6 groups, and they look like a cluster of toadstools. So I will just take those out, not disturbing them, put them in the next bay and load the compost on top of them. That will generate more heat and they will hatch out. And actually, I've been doing this 2-3 times a year for the last, I don't know, 12, 15 years, and we always see masses of grass snakes, which is a complete thrill. If you do find eggs like this in your compost and you're not quite sure what to do, just cover it up and leave them well until September. Give them a chance to hatch. But as far as I'm concerned, complete privilege to have them. I've grown tomatoes in this greenhouse for the last 20 years or so. These are cordon varieties, and they grow very well. The good thing about growing them in a greenhouse is because there's heat, they ripen better and you get a better crop. The other big advantage, especially in this part of the world, is they are protected from airborne blight spores. This is a fungus that can just wipe out a tomato crop. It's the same fungus that affects potatoes. However, this year, for the first time for ages, I am growing some outside because there are varieties now that claim to be either blight tolerant or even blight resistant. These outdoor varieties, there's Lissano and Lossetto, are bush. If you look in there, there are some ripening, and if I take one off, nice little cherry tomato. It hasn't been particularly warm, so you wouldn't expect it to be particularly sweet or ripe. Let's have a taste. It's very nice. Now, if these remain blight resistant, they will definitely be worth growing. Now, if you've tried any of these varieties yourself at home or on your allotment, we'd love to hear from you. Send us pictures, let us know how your tomatoes are developing. And the best way to do that is via our website, and you get all the information from there too. Now, as well as growing tomatoes, here are some other things you can be doing this weekend. Although chives can look past all possible repair, if you cut them back hard now and remove all the top growth and then give them a good water, they will quickly respond by producing new shoots that will taste as delicious as any in spring. When your delphiniums have finished flowering, if you cut them hard to the ground now, there is a real chance that you could get a second flush of flowers later in summer. Give them a feed. I'm using a liquid seaweed, but a tomato feed would do as well. Make sure they're watered well, and then mulch them with compost. You should see signs of new growth within a week or two. If you dampen down the floor of a greenhouse or polytunnel, it increases the humidity and can dramatically reduce the temperature. And this is not only good for plants, but also reduces the risk of spider mite. This has been a really good year for raspberries. We've been eating them for weeks now. And so have the blackbirds, but actually I don't mind, we don't net them anymore because the blackbirds leave more than enough for us. That's it for this time. And next week, we are back at the much earlier time of 7 o'clock. So don't miss it because I will be here. And also Carol starts a new series, Carol's Plant Odyssey, on Monday at 7 o'clock here on BBC Two. But I'll see you next Friday at 7. Till then, bye-bye.